On this Saturday night, the climate conference crisis. Why Canada is being forced to wrangle with the richest nations.
We are fighting for the survival of humanity.
Will the world commit to helping poorer countries move away from fossil fuels? America's record-setting death toll as tens of millions refuse to get vaccinated. Plus, sight unseen, the surge in remote home buying, and how this Quebec river was given the same legal rights as a person.
Global National with Robin Gill.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. With just weeks to go before the United Nations Climate Summit in Scotland, Canada is having to do some heavy lifting. Our Environment Minister has been given the task of corralling countries to raise $100 billion to help more vulnerable nations tackle climate change. As David Akin reports, climate activists are worried the politicians are all talk and no action.
The stakes could not be higher.
We are fighting for the survival of humanity, and that the climate crisis and the threatening ecocide are the biggest threat humanity faces.
Canada's Environment Minister agrees.
We are facing an existential threat. It's not a question of whether we reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It's about how we do it.
Wilkinson was in Italy, meeting with 40 environment ministers from around the world, preparing for a key United Nations meeting on climate, known as COP26, to be held in early November in Glasgow, Scotland. The task for COP26 delegates will be a daunting one: agree on a way to cut global greenhouse gas emissions by 45% by the end of the decade.
This is doable. The bottom line is, folks, that as we stand here today, we believe we can make enormous progress in Glasgow, moving rapidly towards the new goals that the science is telling us we must achieve.
COP26 delegates will also be asked to donate to a $100 billion fund to help developing nations cope with the effects of a rapidly changing climate. Canada is playing a key role in establishing that fund.
Germany and Canada were asked to corral the money in advance of COP. We have been spending a lot of time over the last couple of months doing that.
The delivery on the 100 billion is going to be vital, and that's why we are putting together a delivery plan together with our colleagues in the German and Canadian governments.
But climate activists are worried all the talk by politicians will not be followed by action.
They are pretending that they have solutions to the climate crisis and that they are taking sufficient action. But we see through their lies and we see through their blah, 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 and we are tired of it.
Some of those activists clashed with riot police in Milan, and all of those activists will likely follow the politicians to COP26 in Glasgow in November. David Akin, Global News, Ottawa.
New research suggests our children face a dark future of climate change disasters. They'll experience more heat waves, more severe floods, and crop failures than their parents or grandparents. And they'll live in a world with far fewer types of plants and animals, as evidenced this week when the U.S. declared nearly 24 species officially extinct. As Jackson Proskow reports, scientists warn the planet's biodiversity is at risk.
This is one of the last recordings of the Kauai o'o bird. These, some of the final images of the ivory-billed woodpecker, species that are now gone, officially declared extinct in the United States this week.
We dedicate our lives to preventing extinction, and so acknowledging that we might have lost that fight is hard.
With alarming speed, animals, plants, and insects are disappearing from the Earth. The United Nations reports more than 1 million species are on the brink, at risk of being wiped out, not just by human encroachment, but by the impacts of human-made climate change.
The biodiversity crisis and the climate change crisis are highly intertwined. For example, climate change is impacting wildlife, either directly or indirectly, and leading to more extinction.
In the last 3 years, 30% of the koalas in Australia have perished due to wildfires and drought. In Canada, more than 200 species of animals are today considered at risk. The Vancouver Island marmot is now one of the rarest mammals in the world, their natural habitat and hibernation patterns disrupted by warming weather.
Instead of pushing for protection one species at a time, we really need to look at protecting entire landscapes, entire ecosystems.
Conservationists warn wildlife sanctuaries and protected lands alone are no longer enough. Migratory species like monarch butterflies are being decimated by a disruption in the weather patterns they rely on throughout the seasons.
And it's not safe to assume any species is safe from climate change. Basically, the fate of all wildlife is in our hands now.
Understanding the connection between climate and all life on the planet is an important first step. Without drastic measures to stop the Earth's warming, the sights and sounds of the wild risk being lost forever. Jackson Proskow, Global News, Washington.
Turning to COVID-19, 4 more people have died in New Brunswick as that province faces the biggest surge in cases since the pandemic began. Today, the province smashed its daily case record, reporting 140 new infections. Health officials say 67% of those cases involve unvaccinated patients. Public safety officers in New Brunswick will be conducting spot checks at Faith Services this weekend. A number of churches have been the site of recent public exposures. The COVID-19 pandemic is now the deadliest in American history, surpassing the 1918 Spanish flu. More than 700,000 people have died from the virus since March of 2020. As Jennifer Johnson reports, some extraordinary steps are being taken to curb case numbers and save lives.
70,000 of the last 100,000 COVID-19 deaths in the U.S. have been among the unvaccinated. Lawsuits over vaccine mandates have reached even the nation's highest court. Late Friday, a U.S. Supreme Court justice denied New York City school teachers' emergency request to block a vaccine mandate.
This is crazy.
The teachers, many who protested all month, were required to get vaccinated by September 30th or be placed on unpaid leave for a year. Meanwhile, California has become the first state to require COVID-19 vaccines for all school children, although the mandate won't take effect until the vaccines receive full federal approval.
These requirements are working across the country. I think the evidence is rather overwhelming.
Children over 12 are already eligible to get the shot. Vaccines for 5 to 11-year-olds could get emergency approval from the Food and Drug Administration by the end of October.
I can't wait. I've been waiting for vaccines for my son. That's the biggest concern we have today, is sending him to school without a vaccine.
Last month, President Joe Biden ordered a vaccine mandate for 17 million healthcare workers in facilities receiving federal aid. Hundreds have quit in protest.
It's a personal choice that I feel in free America, I should have the ability to make the choice if and when I want to take it.
Many health experts are encouraged after Merck's announcement that its experimental COVID-19 antiviral pill cuts deaths and hospitalizations in half.
This is a phenomenal result. I mean, this is a profound game changer to have an oral pill that had this kind of effect.
The potential treatment is being compared to Tamiflu, which is supposed to be taken within 2 days of flu symptoms. Merck says it will seek emergency FDA approval soon. Health Canada is also reviewing the pill. The U.S. government has already agreed to buy 1.7 million doses. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
Hundreds of cities across the U.S. are hosting the Women's March today. It's the first one for the Biden administration, with its sights set squarely on abortion rights.
This is what democracy looks like.
Thousands of people headed straight for the steps of the Supreme Court. Women are demanding continued access to abortion in a year when conservative lawmakers and judges have put access on the line. On Monday, the Supreme Court will start a new term. Justices will consider a Mississippi case that could enable them to overturn Roe v. Wade and dramatically reshape access to abortion across the U.S. A Canadian man suspected of being the voice of violence in the so-called Islamic State's propaganda videos is now in FBI custody. Mohammed Khalifa, a former Toronto IT worker, was flown from Syria to Virginia, where he was charged with a terror-related offense. A U.S. Justice Department statement says through his alleged leading role in translating, narrating, and advancing ISIS's online propaganda, Khalifa promoted the terrorist group, furthered its worldwide recruitment efforts, and expanded the reach of videos that glorified the horrific murders and indiscriminate cruelty of ISIS. The Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces captured him in early 2019. He was interviewed by Global News in Syria later that year. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has disappointed Indigenous communities across the country by choosing to spend the first ever National Day for Truth and Reconciliation vacationing on a beach with his family. On this week's edition of the West Block, the National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, Chief RoseAnne Archibald, weighs in on Trudeau's decision to skip ceremonies, including one at the former residential school site in Kamloops. Our Ottawa Bureau Chief Mercedes Stephenson joins us with a preview of that conversation. Mercedes.
The first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation was a chance for Canadians to confront the country's colonial past, one that saw Indigenous children pulled out of their mothers' arms, forcibly sent to schools far away, designed to strip them of their identity, culture, language, even their names. More than 1,300 children have been found in unmarked graves at former schools. They simply never came home. Survivors say there are thousands more graves out there waiting to be found. And on the somber day to mark the horrors of the past, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau departed for a vacation with his family in Tofino. This week on the West Block, I'll sit down with the Assembly of First Nations National Chief RoseAnne Archibald, who didn't mince her words on the Prime Minister's decision to go on vacation and where she felt he should have been. And it's not on a beach in Tofino.
What I would say is there are two standing invitations from Kamloops to Schwetmuk to come to their community, which is the first site that we recovered 215 of our little children. And I urge him to go and visit Chief RoseAnne Casimir, her council, and her community. And that would have been the ideal place for him on yesterday as we mark the very first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation.
Chief Archibald will reveal the challenges she says she's encountering with the Trudeau government when it comes to moving forward with truth and reconciliation. We'll also talk about systemic racism Indigenous Canadians encounter in the healthcare system, now that the coroner's report into the death of Joyce Echaquan has been released in Quebec. National Chief Archibald says many Indigenous Canadians are afraid to seek out the care that they need in the healthcare system, and that this has to change.
Many of our people are afraid to go to hospitals and to see medical professionals because they do encounter overt, covert, and systemic racism in the healthcare system. And that has to change. The healthcare system is about care. Care is a key word there. And another word that we really need to start utilizing more is love and care.
We'll have more on the show tomorrow with Chief Archibald.
Mercedes Stephenson in Ottawa. Thanks, Mercedes.
You're watching Global National.
Here's a rare close-up of Mercury. This black and white image was captured during the joint mission between the European Space Agency and Japan. The spacecraft had just completed the first of 6 flybys, using the planet's gravity to slow down. It's set to approach Mercury in December 2025 and stay for 2 years. Environmentalists are using a revolutionary concept to preserve precious ecosystems. They're getting legal standing for forests, rivers, and lakes as if they're people. It's happened in other parts of the world, but a river in eastern Quebec has become the first in Canada to have such a designation. Global's Krista Hesse traveled there to meet the people behind the Magpie River's new Bill of Rights.
So this is Magpie Falls.
The Magpie River, also known as Moteheko Shipu in Innu, is known for its pristine beauty and its rapids. Danny Pellet runs his whitewater rafting company on the Magpie.
This is a world-class river, incredible nature, really clean water. There aren't many places like this left.
This region of Quebec is famous for its plentiful rivers, many of which serve as a source for the province's hydroelectricity. When a Hydro-Quebec project targeted the Magpie in 2009, paddlers, environmentalists, the local government, and an Innu First Nation united to shield this river from development.
On veut tous la même chose, c'est protéger la rivière Magpie pour nos générations futures.
The alliance decided to try a new tactic: grant the river the same legal rights as a person. In February, 2 parallel resolutions were passed by the Innu Council of Equanashi and the regional government of Mingani. They granted the river 9 rights, including the right to flow and the right to sue.
Dans le colonialisme, on a toujours comme un peu un être supérieur. Tandis que, mettons, dans notre vision à nous, Inuits, je dirais qu'on est des êtres à part égale.
The Innu of Iquanishi have an ancestral and spiritual connection with the river and say it should be treated with respect.
You know, the rights of nature, you could say, is a way to essentially bring that Indigenous value system into Western structures of law.
Over the last decade, forests, rivers, and lakes from New Zealand to Colombia have been granted legal personhood rights.
There's sort of this growing consensus that environmental laws are not enough to protect nature.
The Magpie River is the first ecosystem in Canada to be granted legal rights, but it likely won't be the last. Efforts to assign rights to nature are underway in at least 5 provinces. And while the river's Bill of Rights has not yet been tried in court, communities here hope that it will be enough to deter future development on the Magpie. Krista Hesse, Global News, Mingani, Quebec.
And you can see the full story on the season premiere of the new reality tonight at 7, right here on Global. Up next, a new film linking Canada's residential schools with the foster care system. Festivities in Halifax followed Canada's first National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. Hundreds of people came out for a family day event hosted by the Mi'kmaq Native Friendship Centre. It was a day full of Indigenous history, song and dance. Volunteers showed children how to bead color feathers for dream catchers and make sealskin necklaces. In Canada, federal data shows more than 52% of children in foster care are Indigenous. A new documentary shows how that statistic is a result of residential schools. As Jay Durant reports, the film highlights the generational trauma caused by the system while celebrating Indigenous resilience.
All these kids that I paddle with, we're all kids in care, so we barely know who we are and we don't know where we come from.
The new documentary For Love looks at the impact of residential schools and Indigenous children in care. But layered throughout the film is a message of hope that showcases the strength of youth today and how they're embracing their history.
Everyone's differences are not overcome, but they're celebrated.
They deserve that. They have the right to know who they are, their culture, their clan, their tribe, their language. That's their innate, that's their inherent right.
Wyona Sheldon and Christine Batosh grew up in the care system, removed from an abusive father when they were young.
Just felt really alone, just didn't feel like anything was going to be better. It's a hard topic, so.
But their story is of resiliency and the love and the support they've always had for each other. And about finally learning the truth about where they came from.
We knew nothing at all, yeah.
The chiefs, they kind of looked at us and they're like, who's your parents? Who's your grandparents? And I was just like, so I told them, and then they're just like, you're in the wrong clan. This is your clan, come here.
For Love looks at communities sharing their culture, rebuilding nations, and revitalizing language.
How do you say, I love you? Again. Again.
That's where our oral traditions, our laws, our myths, our legends, that's where they're housed. It's who we are, and it's in our DNA.
The Batoshes drove 8.5 hours from Prince George to Vancouver to be there for the premiere, not knowing entirely what to expect from the film, but knowing that they're proud to have been able to share their story.
We thought for the longest time that we didn't have anybody who cared about us, and now we know that we have a whole village that cares about us and loves us.
Jay Durant, Global News.
And that is Global National for this Saturday night. I'm Robin Gill. Tonight, Your Canada is Pinawa, Manitoba. The Orange Chair is a tribute to the survivors and victims of Canada's residential schools. We'd love to see your corner of the country, so please keep sending your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you back here tomorrow. Have a great night.